I swear to God, the ham was still steaming when my mother decided to humiliate me in front of 8 people, most of whom shared my blood and none of whom shared my choices. The table was set like a catalog, white lace runner, silver candlesticks she only brought out at Christmas and Easter, little crystal bowls with pickles no one ate. It smelled like cloves and judgment. I'd barely finished setting down my store-bought lemon tart. I always bring dessert because it's harder to criticize what comes in a box, when I heard her voice pierce the room with that all-too-familiar tone. Sweet like Splenda. Poison under the surface. Oh, Aaron, Jenny just landed her dream job in New York, she sang out, voice practically dancing. Vice president already. Isn't that something? All those years in finance finally paid off. Real corporate. Real office. You know, she gets her own assistant. I didn't look up. I just reached for a roll, buttered it slowly like I had all the time in the world and none of the patience for this game. I knew what was coming. You could feel it in the air, thick like gravy and just as suffocating. Then the blade came, smooth and shiny, like a good carving knife. When will you start trying, sweetheart? The word sweetheart curled around my throat like a noose. I could feel Jenny's eyes on me, smug and cool, probably thinking I'd make a joke or wave it off like I always did. But not this time. I was done playing the silent daughter, the one who swallowed resentment like communion wine. I smiled. Not fake. Not forced. The kind of smile that says, I know something you don't, and I'm about to enjoy the moment you realize it. I did, I said, folding my napkin with deliberate grace. I just didn't tell anyone who'd doubt me. Forks paused in midair. My father glanced sideways like he wasn't sure if this was about to become a scene or just a weird detour. My cousin Melissa, poor thing, stuck between a family she married into and a family she couldn't relate to, let out a tiny cough like she wished she was anywhere else. Jenny's fiancé cleared his throat, probably wondering if now was a good time to compliment the potatoes. But the silence. Oh, it was glorious. It hung in the air like a bomb with a faulty timer. My mother tilted her head, eyebrows lifted as if she was waiting for the punchline. She didn't get one. Well, I added, raising my wine glass with a deliberate little clink against the rim, don't worry. I'll make sure everyone finds out eventually. They weren't ready for it. The way their faces shifted, Mom's frozen grin, Jenny's sharp glance, my dad's sudden interest in the centerpiece, was like watching people react to a fire alarm they couldn't yet hear, but smelled the smoke. The conversation limped on. Jenny went back to talking about mergers or quarterly reports, I don't know. I tuned out. I watched the flames dance in the candles and counted how many seconds each person chewed before swallowing. It helped. Kept me from blurting the truth too early. Because this time, I had a plan. See, growing up, Jenny was always the star. The straight-A student. The homecoming queen. The girl who got internships and applause and a car at graduation. Me? I was the experiment gone wrong. I left college my second year, backpacked through Asia, dated people they didn't approve of, posted yoga photos online they claimed were not professional. When I started my own business, no one even asked what it was. They assumed it was a phase. A way to avoid getting a real job. They didn't know I worked 18-hour days to get it off the ground. They didn't see me living out of my car for 3 months when I couldn't pay rent. They never heard the sob I let out in the dark parking lot behind my first office, if you could call that closet with a desk and a flickering light an office, when I finally made my first $10,000. Not much in the world of finance, sure, but everything when it's yours, hard-earned and ignored. Jenny got applause for walking down a road everyone approved of. I got silence for forging my own damn trail. But silence can be a weapon too, if you sharpen it just right. So I stayed quiet for now. I passed the gravy, laughed when someone made a joke about Uncle Ron's heartburn, nodded when Mom bragged about Jenny's new corner office with a skyline view. I let them bask in their ignorance because I knew what was coming. What they didn't know, what none of them bothered to ask, was that my business didn't just survive. It blew up. In a good way. Wellness coaching, online retreats, custom content packages for clients all over the country. I had 30,000 followers, a podcast with a sponsor deal, and a monthly income that would make Jenny's jaw drop. And yet, I still brought store-bought pie because if I dared show up with something homemade, my mother would say it was a nice effort. I looked around the table, all of them buzzing with the same shallow energy they always carried. I felt like I'd been invited to a play I'd already seen 100 times, only this time I knew the ending would be different. This time, I had the last line. As the conversation swirled around me like smoke from a dish that had been overcooked, I took another sip of wine and caught Jenny's eye. She raised an eyebrow like she was daring me to say more. I smiled again. Slower this time, more deliberate. I thought, not yet, but soon, because I didn't just bring lemon tart to dinner. I brought dynamite, and I was going to light the fuse. The thing people never seem to understand about families is that no one forgets who you were at 17, especially if it makes them feel better about themselves to remember you that way. I could have built a rocket to Mars by now, and my mom would still introduce me to new neighbors as the one who dyed her hair blue and almost missed prom because she got caught shoplifting eyeliner from Walgreens. For the record, I didn't steal anything. I was holding it for my friend Ashley while she tried on a different shade, but it didn't matter because Mom needed a cautionary tale and I was already halfway cast in the role. Jenny, on the other hand, was born with a resume stapled to her baby blanket. By 5th grade, she had a spreadsheet for her chores. By 10th grade, she had already booked a summer internship at a local real estate firm while I was still trying to remember what time school started after spring break. Our house was one of those places where potential only counted if it came with a GPA and a backup plan. And Jenny? She checked every damn box. It wasn't that I didn't care. I cared too much, actually. I just cared about the wrong things at least, according to them. I wanted to paint and read and figure out how people worked. I liked staring out car windows and wondering what other lives looked like, what happened behind closed doors, and why we were all pretending to be more put together than we were. I was always asking questions. Jenny was always answering them. When I left home at 21, it wasn't a dramatic exit with shouting and slamming doors, though part of me sometimes wishes it had been. It was just a quiet drive to the airport with 2 bags, a one-way ticket to Costa Rica, and the kind of goodbye you give to people who will never understand why you're leaving. They thought I was chasing a fantasy. That I'd call crying after 2 months, broke and bug-bitten, asking for a plane ticket home, and promising to enroll in grad school. Instead, I stayed. I slept in hostels, I worked odd jobs, I learned to live with less, and somewhere along the line, I started building something that actually felt like mine. A little business. A little brand. Just me, a laptop, a few certifications, and a hell of a lot of faith. I still remember the first time I hit $5,000 in a single month. I stared at the number on my PayPal dashboard like it was a lottery ticket someone had accidentally given me. Then I cried. Not because I was proud, though I was, but because for the first time in my adult life, I realized I didn't need anyone's approval to feel real. But I didn't tell them. Not because I was hiding it, but because no one ever asked. Not once. Not during birthdays or holidays or the occasional dry phone call where Mom asked if I'd finally settled down. To them, I'd always be the girl who got away, like a fish you toss back into the lake because it's too weird to eat. So yeah, I kept my success quiet. I let Jenny shine at Thanksgiving and Christmas, and every time she sent a group text with photos from another conference or keynote or panel. I clapped. I smiled. I even liked her posts. But behind the scenes, I was building something different, something messy, something beautiful, something that didn't need applause to matter. When I finally crossed the 200K mark last quarter, I figured, maybe I should tell them I'm not homeless. I mean, sure, I work in yoga pants and sometimes answer emails from a hammock, but the work is real. The money is real. I'm not just some barefoot burnout hoping to sell lavender oil and moon water to college kids. This is a real business. I figured that made about $250 annually, give or take. Jenny could walk into any room and get respect before she even opened her mouth. I had to fight tooth and nail just to be taken seriously enough to finish a sentence. But that's the thing about bad girls, they learn how to make noise without raising their voices. They learn how to make space where they're not invited. And when they're finally ready to speak, people listen. Back at the dinner table, Jenny was recounting some merger deal she helped push through, talking fast and clean like she was on CNBC. Mom nodded, smiling so hard her jaw must have hurt. I let her finish. I even sipped my wine and threw in a wow for good measure. But when she finally paused to adjust her napkin, I leaned in just enough to make her look at me. You know, Jenny, I said, voice low but sharp, I've always admired how you play by the rules. There was that beat of silence again, like a pinprick in a balloon. I just realized. I tilted my head, letting the words hang like storm clouds. I write them. There's something truly delicious about watching someone so carefully composed begin to fray at the edges, especially when you've spent years being the one picked apart while they got handed the benefit of every doubt. Jenny had always carried herself like the world owed her something for being clean, polite, and efficient, a walking LinkedIn profile with just enough charm to fool a room and just enough calculation to keep control of every narrative. But the problem with perfection is that it only works as long as no one starts asking real questions, and tonight I decided to stop playing dumb. After my little comment about writing the rules, the air got just a little heavier. Jenny didn't say anything right away, which told me she hadn't figured out whether I was bluffing or not. That was good. Let her stew. Let her wonder if I knew something I wasn't saying, because I did. I knew a lot. I knew, for starters, that the job she landed wasn't so much a hard-earned promotion as it was a family favor, wrapped in corporate language and tied with a ribbon of privilege. Her fiancé Charles's father owns the damn company, and the VP title was more ceremonial than strategic. She hadn't beat out any competition. She hadn't even interviewed. She was slid into the role like a diamond into a velvet box, gently, quietly, and far from deserving. And I also knew, because small worlds always have big mouths, that Jenny had been cheating on Charles 6 months ago with a coworker named Bryce. I didn't know if it had ended, and honestly, I didn't care. I wasn't here to blow up her life. Not yet. I just wanted the lies to sweat a little. I wanted her to feel what it was like to sit at a table where someone knew more than they were saying and wasn't afraid to use it. So I waited. I let the dinner drag on just long enough for everyone to get a little too comfortable again. The room settled. Jenny leaned into another story about a recent client dinner in the city, and I could already hear Mom winding up for another round of thinly veiled boasting. That was my cue. I tilted my wine glass, studying the color like it had something profound to say, then dropped my voice just enough to make everyone lean in a little closer. You remember that Paris trip Jenny took last fall? I said casually, eyes still on the glass. Bet you didn't know it was a solo trip. +1. Jenny's head snapped around so fast I half expected her neck to crack. She let out a sharp little laugh, like she thought maybe I was joking or praying I was bluffing. Mom blinked, then gave a short wave of her hand. Oh, that was for work, wasn't it, Jenny? Some finance conference or something international. You stayed at that darling boutique hotel, remember? Jenny nodded quickly, maybe too quickly, the kind of nod you give when you're trying to agree before someone asks follow-up questions. Her fiancé Charles had been mid-sip of wine, and for a second, he paused. Just long enough. Just noticeably enough. Dad, who rarely paid attention to anything besides his golf scores and roast beef, actually squinted at her like he was trying to remember something. Or like something suddenly didn't add up. Jenny coughed and reached for her water. Yes, just very boring. All business. We barely had time to see anything. I smiled and nodded, like I hadn't just thrown a grenade into the middle of the conversation. Sure. That's what you always say about Paris. The table shifted again, energy off-kilter, like someone had adjusted the room's gravity. It wasn't chaos, not yet. But the cracks were visible now. Jenny's perfectly curled hair didn't hide the flush creeping up her neck, and her voice had a slight tremble when she reached for the mashed potatoes and asked if anyone needed more. I let the silence linger for a second longer, then reached into my purse and pulled out a white envelope. Clean, crisp, heavy with implication. The kind of envelope you only bring when you're tired of being invisible. "Mom," I said, voice clear but not loud, just enough to slice through the sound of silverware and artificial small talk. "Since we're celebrating jobs, here's mine." I held it out across the table, but I didn't explain what was inside. I didn't need to. Not yet. The ambiguity was the point. Because when people don't know what you're capable of, their imagination will always do more damage than the truth. Jenny stared at the envelope like it had a pulse. Mom looked confused, hesitant, even a little annoyed, like I was interrupting something more important than my own career. I saw Charles glance at it too, his brow furrowed in that particular way that says a man's putting two and two together but not liking what he gets. But I didn't push. I just placed the envelope on the table, right between the gravy boat and the honey-glazed carrots, and went back to my wine like I hadn't just dropped a landmine on the linen. No one reached for it. That was fine. They would. Eventually. The envelope sat there like a dare nobody had the guts to open, untouched, taking up more space than the casserole dish beside it and more weight than any of the strained conversations circling around the table. I didn't rush it, didn't look at it, didn't nudge it forward with the kind of passive-aggressive insistence that would give them a reason to roll their eyes and dismiss it like everything else I'd ever done that didn't fit into their idea of acceptable, successful, or normal. I just waited, chewing slowly, sipping wine, acting like I hadn't detonated a device that was about to shift the tectonic plates beneath this entire family. Eventually, almost inevitably, Jenny couldn't help herself. She reached for the envelope with a manicured hand that was just a little less steady than before, the veneer cracking, the facade peeling just slightly around the edges. I watched her slide her finger under the flap with the kind of surgical precision she usually reserved for flipping through resumes or dissecting someone's dating history. She pulled out the papers, stacked, sharp, and intentional, and I watched the confidence drain out of her face like wine spilling from a broken glass. The first page was a screenshot of a feature article from Forbes. My face, my name, the headline glowing with terms like innovative, self-made, and six-figure wellness empire. The next page showed a cropped bank statement with monthly income deposits that didn't need context to make jaws tighten. Under that, LLC paperwork, a client testimonial collage, and press mentions from wellness and tech publications they'd never thought I was smart enough to be in. Each page was a quiet scream that I had not only built something real, but I had done it without their belief, without their guidance, and most insultingly to them, without their permission. Jenny tried to recover, flipping quickly through the pages like maybe if she moved fast enough they'd vanish, like this evidence of my worth could be blurred by speed. But it was all there. All real. All printed in ink. Mom leaned forward, eyebrows high, mouth tight in that way she always had when she was trying to look supportive, but smelled something she didn't like. "Why would you keep this from us?" she asked, the way you might ask a child why they hadn't told you about a failed test, more accusatory than curious, more insulted than concerned. I didn't flinch. I didn't shrink. I just smiled in that small, tired way people do when they've waited years for the question, but already know the answer. "Because you never asked," I said plainly. "You assumed I failed. Because failure fits your narrative better than success you didn't control." There was a moment, sharp and still, where my words landed like ice cracking across a frozen lake, stretching out toward every person at that table. My father shifted in his chair like he wanted to get up, like his bones could feel the discomfort settling in, and for the first time since I walked through the front door, he looked directly at me, not with anger, not with disbelief, but with the kind of blank hesitation that comes when someone starts to realize they might have missed an entire chapter of someone's life. Jenny tossed the papers back onto the table like they burned her fingers, arms crossed so tightly it looked like she was trying to hold herself together. "You did this for attention," she snapped, voice clipped, defensive, trembling underneath the surface. I let out a laugh, not cruel, not mocking, just amused at the sheer irony of the statement coming from the woman who couldn't post a coffee order without 3 hashtags and a filtered photo. "No," I said, swirling the last of my wine. "But attention's a hell of a side effect." There it was again, that silence. Heavier this time. A weighted blanket of discomfort settling over everyone. Melissa coughed into her napkin. Uncle Ron suddenly remembered he needed more salt. My mother started to open her mouth again, probably to pivot to a safer topic or to play the victim in a story she was no longer in control of, but I didn't give her the chance. Instead, I reached for my phone, unlocked it, typed quickly, and hit send. A soft buzz followed a second later, too small to notice under the tension, but I made sure it was visible. I tilted my phone upward, just enough for Jenny to catch the screen's soft glow before it faded to black. "Your message to Charles sent." Jenny's face froze, not like before, not the performative pause of someone deciding how to play a scene, but like a person watching the thread of their life come undone by a pair of hands they never expected to be that steady. Her lips parted, then closed, then opened again as if trying to find words that had somehow left the room without her. The table didn't know what had just happened, not yet. But she did. And that was enough for now. I leaned back in my chair and looked around, seeing for the first time how small this table really was, how claustrophobic the walls of that house had always been, how much space I had created for myself beyond it. And while everyone else tried to pretend dinner was still going according to plan, Jenny's world had already begun to tilt. And I wasn't even done. Jenny stood so abruptly that her chair let out a shriek across the hardwood floor, the sound slicing through the heavy quiet like a blade, sharper than any insult I could have thrown. Her face was pale beneath the soft blush she always wore, but her eyes, those carefully curated eyes, were burning with something between rage and humiliation. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. The silence she left in her place said everything she couldn't. Her heels clicked with purpose as she stormed out of the dining room, one sharp step after another, like she thought if she walked fast enough she could outrun what I'd done. Or maybe what she'd done. Hard to tell. Dad followed, of course. Because even though he rarely understood the words being said, he always reacted to the volume. And tonight, even silence had become loud. He didn't look at me as he passed, which didn't surprise me. For years, he'd specialized in the kind of passive parenting that lived in the gaps between eye contact and consequence. He preferred weekends to be quiet and daughters to be easy. I was neither. Mom stayed seated, knife and fork still in her hands, face set in that tight, controlled expression that only ever cracked when she thought no one was looking. But now she wasn't pretending anymore. Her lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line, and for a moment I thought she might say something that mattered, something real, something that made all of this mess worth wading through. But of course, she didn't. She simply stared, like maybe if she kept still long enough this whole thing would dissolve like sugar in her tea. Me? I stayed too. I stayed and finished dessert like the storm hadn't just rolled through the room and torn the curtains off the windows. The lemon tart was a little too sweet, a little underwhelming compared to what had just unfolded, but I chewed with deliberate calm, swallowed slowly, and let the silence settle in like an old friend I hadn't seen in years, but always recognized. My phone buzzed in my lap, once, quietly, like it was trying not to interrupt. I glanced down, already knowing what I'd see. The message preview sat on my lock screen, simple and clean, no punctuation, just wait. Charles, thanks. I had a feeling. I locked the screen before anyone could read it, though honestly, at this point, I wasn't even trying to hide it. I'd sent him the proof earlier in the evening, a few carefully chosen screenshots, timestamps that painted a picture no amount of denial could wash away. There hadn't been malice in the action, no drunken vengeance, no theatrical rage. Just balance, a sense of justice. I wasn't trying to destroy her life. I just wanted to put the truth on the table next to the dishes she used to impress people. Let the man decide for himself what kind of future he was signing up for. And apparently, he already suspected. That was the thing about curated lives. If you polished them too hard, eventually people noticed the shine was fake. I wiped my mouth, set the napkin down, and looked straight at my mother. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not with confusion, but something else, something closer to disbelief. Not about Jenny's fall from grace, but about mine. Or more accurately, about the fact that I hadn't fallen at all. You always wanted to know why I disappeared, I said quietly, not needing volume anymore, not needing drama. Just clarity. 3 years ago. When I stopped answering calls. When I didn't come home for Christmas. She didn't answer. But she blinked once, twice. That was enough. That was as close to curiosity as she'd ever get. I was pregnant, I said. No build-up. No ceremony. Just the raw, dull truth. And I lost it. I lost her. For a moment, not a single thing in the room moved. Not the candles, not the shadows, not even her fork. Her fingers gripped it like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to the table. I was building the business, working 14-hour days, living off coffee and panic. I didn't have health insurance. I didn't have savings. And I sure as hell didn't have anyone to call. I could feel it again, the hospital waiting room, the sterile air, the way the nurse looked at me like I was just another cautionary tale on legs. I hadn't cried then. I'd waited until I was back in my apartment, staring at a ceiling fan that never spun straight, wondering if grief counted when no one else knew it existed. I didn't need casseroles, I added, voice thickening. I needed a mother. I got Instagram likes instead. The words landed with a kind of finality that didn't require response. Mom didn't reach for me. She didn't apologize. She just sat there, shoulders stiff, eyes not meeting mine, and in that moment, I knew I was no longer angry. I was done. I stood up, slow and steady, like someone stepping off a train they'd ridden too long, someone finally arriving in a city they built themselves. I slipped on my coat, the one she once called bohemian like it was a bad thing, and slung my bag over my shoulder. You all wanted me to be something else, I said, eyes sweeping the room that had once felt like a cage. But I became something better. Just not for you. And with that, I walked out, no dramatic door slam, no parting shot, just the sound of my boots on the hardwood, each step echoing in the vacuum of their stunned silence. I didn't know if I'd feel free when I stepped outside. I didn't know if I'd feel regret. But I knew I wouldn't feel small anymore. Behind me, the confetti of the evening, fragments of truth, pride, guilt, and resentment, still floated in the air, but it didn't sparkle. It looked like ashes. And maybe that was the point. What's worse, I wondered as I turned the key in the ignition, being underestimated or being invisible.